welcome back. When I get to heaven, of course I'm going to make a mad dash to see Jesus and spend a few thousand years talking to him, but the next person I want to see and talk to is the Apostle Paul. He blows me away. He is such a hero of the faith, such an example and model of how to live a godly, joy-filled life in spite of terrible opposition and struggle. I said in the last session that joy is not based on outward circumstances, but on inward certainties, and nobody knew that better than Paul. The Bible records part of Paul's story in 2 Corinthians 11, where he details all that he had suffered. He was in prison. He was whipped. He was beaten. He was stoned. He was shipwrecked. He spent a day and a night in the open sea. He was in danger from bandits. He says, I was in danger from rivers and seas and false believers. I was hungry, I was thirsty, I was cold, and I was naked. And yet, in spite of all that, he had the audacity to say some things like this: rejoice in the Lord always. In everything, give thanks. He was crazy enough to say, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. He said, be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. He said, whether I have a little or a lot, I'm content. He said, we rejoice in our sufferings. I mean, how could he do that? How could he have that kind of attitude after suffering so much? Many of those statements were made while he was in prison, chained 24/7 to a Roman guard. How did he do that? Well, from what I can see, Paul had aligned his values with the value system of heaven. He chose the eternal over the temporary time and time again. Although he was in chains on the outside, on the inside, he was free. As long as you and I are chained, tied to the world's value system of seeking joy in people, places, possessions, position, and personalities, we'll never find joy. It's only in choosing the eternal over the temporary that we can find joy. Now, if you had asked Paul if he was comfortable in a prison cell, he would have probably said no. I mean, he wasn't a machine or a robot or a zombie. He was a flesh and blood guy who missed his friends. And he would have loved to have had a couple of warm blankets and would much rather have been out traipsing around the Roman Empire talking about Jesus than being cooped up in a prison chained to a guard. But in the end, his circumstances didn't matter as much to him as the work that God was accomplishing through his sufferings. As we talked about yesterday, the basis for joy is to choose the eternal over the temporary every time. As 2 Corinthians 4:16-18 says, therefore we do not lose heart, though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. Paul had learned long before that God was the only true source of joy for him. He had already experienced the pain of friends who had abandoned him, cities that closed their doors to him, earthly possessions that couldn't satisfy, an education that couldn't save him, and a personality that often got him into trouble. No, Paul had figured out that God was his only true source of joy, and because of that, he consistently, faithfully chose to focus not on what he could see with his eyes, but on what he could see with his spirit. No wonder he could urge us 2,000 years later to rejoice, to give thanks in everything, to be content with what we have, to be patient in affliction, and to not lose heart. Heaven's value system was his, and so were heaven's joys. I'll see you tomorrow.